A few weeks ago, I went to Mendlesham in Suffolk to visit the Church of St Mary, a very fine medieval building in what was formerly a small and prosperous little market town. It's a very grand and imposing structure from the outside, and the people who constructed it must have had a great pride in it. And it's approached through this two-storey north porch of the 15th century, which is in characteristic East Anglian masonry, what is called flint flushwork. The interior of this church is very spacious, with arcades north and south of the 13th century. Well, I came here at the invitation of two friends of mine, the vicar, Father Philip Gray, and his wife Anne, to take a look at a unique treasure that the church contains. That treasure is above the fancy north porch in a first floor chamber called a parvis that is reached by a narrow spiral staircase. And in the chamber is England's only surviving Tudor parish armoury. Now, when you climb the little spiral stairs to the chamber, you initially come face to face with a stout ironclad door, which is opened through the use of three enormous keys. Inside the parvis, the whole of the chamber, walls and ceiling, have been lined with plain sawn timber, and what remains of the armour is still hung up on the walls. Thick Tudor iron bars protect the windows so that nobody can get in and make off with the armour. What is remarkable about this room is that we know it existed in this form as early as 1593. So to enter the room is to enter a very rare thing indeed, a Tudor time capsule, an authentic and virtually unaltered space from the 16th century. Sadly, we don't know precisely when the armoury was created here. There is one bit of evidence, a curious entry in the churchwarden's accounts of 1593, of a payment of 16 pence to a certain Bartholomew Knights for making of certain provision of timber work for the well hanging up of the town armour, he finding the timber. Now, 16 pence is a very meagre sum even in 1593, and in terms of labour and timber wouldn't pay for a panelled room of this sort. And I suspect that what Knight was paid for in 1593 was simply an addition to an existing chamber, a means of hanging up what was clearly an already assembled collection of armour that was already being housed here. Sadly, there is no evidence of any major expenditure on this sort of room anywhere in the Mendlesham churchwarden's accounts of the 16th century, but that is not surprising, as the accounts were written on single leaves. They survive from 1552 and 1553. They stop completely, starting again in 1572 and 1574. Then they stop again, only being kept with any regularity from 1581. So 79 years of the 16th century are not covered, and I suspect the chamber was created in one of those missing years. Dendrodating the timber is probably the only way of solving the riddle. So why is there an armoury in a church? Well, each parish in the 16th century was required to provide a quota of men to serve in times of need in the local militia. The number of men was based on the size of the population of the place. Each parish was required to send those men regular for training, equipped and armed. There are few community spaces other than parish churches for the storage of communal parish goods such as armour and weapons. Often England's parish churches had a number of subsidiary spaces and porches and towers that were ideally suited for the task. What a parish like Mendlesham was tasked with providing was infantrymen, foot soldiers, and they were to equip two types of infantry soldier. One group was to be armed with pikes or polearms and were provided with rudimentary armour for close quarter combat, while a second group were more lightly armed with bows and muskets. At Mendlesham, the surviving items stored in the armoury show evidence of the provision of both. The armour and weapons that survive are not fancy and up to date. There was probably enough armour in this room to equip 6 to 12 men, and it is a ragtag collection of armour of varying dates. Some dates to as early as the end of the 15th century, and a large proportion dates from the middle of the 16th century, which may be when the room was created. Most of the armour isn't English, it's German or Italian, and it would have been purchased as a job lot on the second-hand market. Some of it undoubtedly had seen significant action on the battlefield before arriving in rural Suffolk. Very few weapons survive at Mendlesham. On the wall there are bespoke brackets to support bows and muskets. On one is a single remaining longbow. The yew longbow was the infantry weapon of choice until the middle of the 16th century, and its presence here may suggest that the armoury is much earlier than the 1590s. There is also the barrel of a musket, and hanging below this are 3 late 16th century powder flasks. 2 of the flasks are neatly engraved with the name Mendlesham to ensure that in the chaos of any battle they return home. The armoury was very much a working collection in the 17th century, and it continued to be augmented as time went on, and there are a few pieces of armour that date from the English Civil War period. In 1635 the churchwarden's accounts note that Mendlesham paid 3 shillings 6 for a new stock and trigger for the town musket. It seems that by the time of the Civil War, Mendlesham was only routinely providing 1 soldier for the militias, despite having all of this equipment. In 1634, Mendlesham raised only 1 soldier, who was provided with only a single pound of powder and 12 shots for the town musket. In 1640, the churchwarden spent the large sum of £4 4 shillings on replacing faulty equipment. Perhaps that is when some of the later armour was purchased. Another remarkable thing that survives here in this wonderful Tudor space are a couple of early 15th century iron-bound parish chests made of Baltic pine. Such chests are to be found in churches all over East Anglia, and they're evidence of the rich trade that once existed in the Middle Ages between England and the rest of Europe. Certain towns on the east coast, including Ipswich, Great Yarmouth and King's Lynn, were trading posts for the guild network called the Hanseatic League, and luxury goods from the Baltic were pouring into England in the late Middle Ages. These chests were used to store the parish records and registers in times past, including the churchwarden's accounts that reference expenditure on armour and the armoury. You can still see here a small collection of documents that were once kept in the chests. Among them is a fascinating letter found among the churchwarden's accounts of 1584. It is a letter of that period, a letter of complaint from a group of 12 poor men of Mendlesham who had been pressed into militia service, perhaps at the time of the Anglo-Spanish War, just before the threat of the Spanish Armada fell upon England. They complain that they had been to a recent summer training camp but had not been paid their expenses, and they wanted recompense. And among the men who signs the letter is Bartholomew Knights, the Mendlesham carpenter. Thanks very much for watching.